Welcome back, everybody, to another After Action Report. My name is Joshua Joshi Howard, and today I'm going to be talking about the most recent GT I went to over the weekend, the Pacific Northwest Warlords Spring 40K GT, hosted in Ellensburg, Washington. Before I get into the lists and all the fun stuff at the event, I do, of course, want to give a big shout out to Bailey Strom, the owner and manager of Windy City Toys and Collectibles, hosted in Ellensburg. He put on a good event. He just opened up a new store, having moved from a different spot within the city, and it's really cool. I really enjoy the new location that they have, and it was well run, and everything seemed to go pretty smoothly. So shout out to Bailey on running a good event, and looking forward to going again another time. So this was a fairly small event overall. There were only 24 players at this GT, and the main thing that I wanted to do at this event was I honestly wanted to go because this was the last day, the last weekend that I could have gone to a GT and still had it count for ELO, because I was pulling up on a spot where I was really, really close to DK, and I've hit a part in the stat check ELO where I would have lost like 60 something points, which is always sad, and I did not want to lose that much gamer number, and I just wanted to, even if I did not have a great event, I was going to lose less ELO, losing a couple of games than I would just decaying. So I was just trying to make sure I was going to prevent that, push it back a little bit further. And of course, I also wanted to do well. So one of the things about this event that I've mentioned I'm not super fond of in other circumstances at other events as well is I've never been a fan of releasing player packs after list submission is due, because I think it needlessly punishes people who actually do want to put in a little bit more time into trying to understand the event, trying to make sure that they have something that makes sense for the map submissions you're going to play. I have a lot of thoughts in general about like the sameness of lists that people are looking at across Guard and across the game in general. I might put up like a rambling video about that sometime next week, but regardless, I always like having the missions available before you actually lock in any kind of list. So with that, let's go ahead and start talking about the list that I actually took this event. I have been practicing a little bit. I have a Teams event coming up later this week by the time this video comes out. It is a Teams event. And if you watched my breakdown of the West Coast Warbands video a couple of weeks ago, this is almost exactly the same list. The only difference is it went up 30 points, so I had to make a couple of small changes. We'll go ahead and talk about those as I get through this video. Also, the Twin Lance, I think, was allowed at this event, but the only Tau player at this event was playing Crew Hunting Pack, and I don't think they had the Twin Lance. So even if it was allowed, we weren't playing with it. It did not show up at the event. And then we were playing with all the new points at this, even though they had come out only a couple of days before the event. So my list, I had a Cadian Castellan, a Cadian Command Squad, 2 Scion Command Squads, both of them with regimental standards. I've gone back and forth between liking the volley gun versus the regimental standard in this position. Nork Deddog, 2 Rogal Dorn Commanders, 1 unit of 20 Cadian Shock Troops, 1 unit of 10 Cadian Shock Troops, 1 unit of 10 Death Corps of Krieg, 2 Chimeras, both with heavy flamers, 1, 2, 3 units of Kasrkin, 1, 2, 3 units of 5 Krieg Engineers. I have a slight preference here for the trench clubs and the auto pistols as opposed to the combat shotguns, but it really doesn't matter which one you take, to be entirely honest. And then 1, 2 units of Tempestus Scions with Melta and Plasma. So the list did not change a lot from what I was playing before. I used to have a 3rd Chimera, and I also had the Laud Hailer enhancement on, I think it was on the Cadian Commander, I don't remember. I never once came up in any game that I had practiced with it, but I cut that 10-point enhancement here, and then I had needed to cut 20 more points from the list, and the way that I chose to do it was by cutting 1 Chimera and adding in a unit of 10 Death Corps of Krieg. There are a couple of other ways that you could take the exact same list and make some small changes to it. The first one, and potentially the easiest one, is you change Nork Deddog to an Ogrim Bodyguard, and then that saves you 20 points here, and then you can keep, instead of having the Death Corps of Krieg, you can keep the Chimera. There were times where I kind of wished I did have the Chimera, but there were also times where I was like, this Death Corps of Krieg unit is better than the Chimera would have been, and Nork sometimes just goes sicko mode. Sometimes he's just that guy. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the list. I think there are some minor changes you could consider making to this if you're trying to play Games Workshop singles events, but like, I'm not going to lie to you guys, when I put together this list, I had been writing lists for a little while, assuming that we were going to lose like 100 points of stuff, and we didn't. So the fact that I ended up just running a list that just downgraded, and arguably downgraded 1 unit for another, was like cool. We're there. Like this doesn't make a difference basically at all. We still have at least one too many units, and it definitely came up in some of the games. So let's go ahead and get into the first game that I played for this event. I played up against James and his Space Marines Vanguard Spearhead. That is correct. There is no chapter associated with this, and he called it Alpha Legion. It was actually a really nice, like metallic tealish blue, those Alpha Legion colors. I really like the way that James had his army painted. But he was playing a Captain in Phobos armor, a Lieutenant in Phobos armor, a Lieutenant with combi weapon that did go up 15 points. 1, 2, 3 Gladiator Lancers. 1, 2, 3 squads of 3 Inceptors, all with the plasma. 1, 2 units of Incursors, the ones that you shoot at something and get +1 to hit. 1, 2 units of 5 Infiltrators. These are the ones that don't let you deep strike around them. 1, 2 Invictor Tactical Warsuits. I'll be honest, I don't really know what these do. I still don't really know what they do. 1 Stormseer Thunderstrike. This is the one that gives you +1 to wound. 5 Vanguard Vets with Inferno Pistols, and a Calidus Assassin. For our game, James and I played this one on Mission L. Take and Hold, Search and Destroy, and Games Workshop Layout 1. Couple key things about this matchup and Layout 1 in general is a Chimera staged in here with a 13-inch move can basically always come to here and dump guys out somewhere in this area. So your opponent does not really have this safe staging spot. And the other major thing about it is depending on whether or not your opponent has enough shooting, you can very easily deploy stuff over here that'll like kind of hang out here, or like a tank going here, moving 13 inches. It's going to be able to get like this kind of line onto the opponent's like staging area. So it can oftentimes be really, really difficult for them to actually stage on this. This is a much more open map than a lot of people really think it is if they don't have a lot of experience playing Layout 1. However, my opponent did have the 3 Gladiator Lancers, so I did have to respect his ability to shoot me a decent amount. And one of the first things that I kind of want to show you guys as a trick on Layout 1 and the way you should always be looking to deploy your Dorns, especially if you have 2 of them. Typically, if you are playing on like Tipping Point, which is like this, or Crucible of Battle, which is more like this, you're going to put 1 Dorn here with the idea that this, like you can poke a tread here, and this is going to be 10 inches, and then like to this corner of the Dorn. And then the other thing that you want to do is, depending on how much you want to respect your opponent's shooting, you can also consider leaving space here for a Chimera to scout backwards, depending on exactly what deployment you're doing. But the other thing is, this wants to be as able to go as far this way as possible, because while you want to be able to threaten shooting here and taking whatever shots is available, the real thing that you want to do is you mostly want this Dorn to come out this way so it can stay here, shoot this line, and then be able to threaten the turn after to go over this way, shoot this line, shoot anything on this objective. So you want to be able to threaten this, but you don't really want the Dorn to go there most of the time. The other Dorn on most times you're playing Layout 1 is going to end up here. You're going to have like your sponsons like this, and then your gun generally angled this way. The main thing here is the Dorn here is not shootable here. It's not shootable here unless your opponent comes out pretty far. And then this Dorn is going to have an option to go like be wholly within here, where you have this super deep line. Or if there's nothing to shoot, you can end up hiding kind of in here, where you're ready to go shoot down this line or shoot down this line. And that's generally what you're going to be wanting to do with your Dorns when you're playing Layout 1. Anyway, my opponent had a lot of Infiltrators. He had 2 units of Infiltrators. I think Incursors also have Infiltrate, but I'm not sure. I think they were infiltrated. But when I told my opponent I had no Infiltrate, he was like, okay, line of dudes here, and I think it was like the Calidus here, and then it puts like a unit of Infiltrators, and like a unit of Infiltrators. Combi Lieutenant was like somewhere over here. And of course, he also has the ability to redeploy. I think it's the Lieutenant in Phobos armor that lets him do that. But after he did that, he basically took the line of dudes that was here. I think he put them like here, and the line of dudes that was here, and maybe they went back here. Or maybe it was like the Incursors or something, because there's like a couple of units of Marines like this. He had like a tactical warsuit here, somewhere in here, and then the other one started here and ended up scouting to here. Okay, now one of the big things about doing these kinds of deployments, especially if you have redeploys, is if you aren't going to keep them there, it's not really a threat, right? Like, because he redeploys before I do my scout moves. Like, my first thought was like, cool, well, if I go first, I'm going to kill this for free by like being here and shooting, and I'm going to kill this for free by like being here and shooting, or like being here and shooting in ways that I can't get shot back at all. It's going to be great. And then if I go second, then like, cool, then we'll actually get to like play a brawl for a little bit. But the big thing is like, I had a Chimera here. I had my other Chimera. I was actually fairly defensive with it. I deployed it like here with the idea that I could scout it back 6 to about here, such that it would not be on this central line. But I could also put like engineers. I think I had another unit of engineers. These ones could scout back. These ones were going to die if I went second. That kind of is what it is. And then these ones would go kind of this way if I went first, and otherwise they just kind of stay still. The other major plan here was that the Cadian brick was starting like here, and it was going to go move over here, make sure I can screen out as much of this as possible, and then later push over this way. One of the big themes of not just this game, but it's going to be a theme of this event, is a lot of my opponents were not used to how fast and how aggressive guard could be, especially if it goes first. Guard can do a lot of damage if we go first. So when I went first, instead of scouting my Chimera to here, Chimera just goes directly at him. This Chimera goes, as far this way as it can. Engineers go, and these engineers come like over this way. And my opponent had a Calidus Assassin, an Invictor Warsuit, and like I think they're Incursors. I think it was Incursors. To be honest, I couldn't tell you. I just saw that they were Marines and I wanted them gone. And my first turn was just killing all of this stuff. How did I kill? So I definitely took like engineers. They came out. Engineers. They came out. I think the other Chimera also came here and like dropped Kasrkin here. This Chimera came over this way, so it like had a bead on the character. I dropped Kasrkin here, and I just killed everything that he had that was not in his deployment zone, basically. He had like a combi lieutenant and like another unit of dudes over here, but I just picked up a bunch of his army, and my whole plan this game was I'm going to hold this. My opponent is never going to do anything about it. I'm going to be dropping Scions here, maybe here if there's an opportunity, but I'm going to keep the game bottled to this part of the board. And yes, I'm going to lose a lot of pieces fairly quickly. However, he will not be able to deal with my Dorns, because my Dorns will always get to shoot first, because he needs to take his Gladiator Lancers out to kill my chaff, and then he's also just not going to have the volume to kill the Cadian brick ever throughout the course of this game. And so those three pieces, as long as I can kill all of the threats and I can just start the game going really, really quickly, my opponent is going to run out of models way faster than I do. And that's more or less kind of what happened. My opponent came out, killed fewer Kasrkin and engineers than I think he expected to. I rolled like a 5 or a 6 on my advance from the Cadians, and so they were very comfortably tucked in here. I staged other Dorn, something like this. This Dorn was still staged, and I just killed, I basically just killed his army over and over again. I think the most telling thing about this entire game was I had this whole Cadian brick that was kind of here, trying to screen out Inceptors. And this unit, I think, ended somewhere in here, because I never had an opportunity to charge. I had sticky this objective. I was looking for an opportunity to go this way. I had Rapid Ingress Scions one turn to touch this objective, and then I move them to hop over this wall so I could shoot. I dropped more Scions over here so they could shoot, and I think the closest my opponent ever got to taking any of my objectives was in the bottom of 5. He had a combi lieutenant come over here to sabotage, because I just stopped caring about screening because I had so much overwhelming board control. So realistically, my goal of holding this by blocking out with Cadians and threatening that if he were to drop Inceptors, one, they only have 6 shots. I think it's 2 shots per dude. And by having a ton of dudes over here and getting my Dorns to shoot at his Lancers before his Lancers ever shot at my Dorns, I was just able to pick up the army and just march towards his home objective incredibly quickly. And I think the major takeaway from this game is, if you've never played against an aggressive guard player before, you don't actually understand the guard matchup very well. Because realistically, everything that James had in his army that was not hidden in the castle or behind this wall, I could get to, and I could take them down very, very quickly. So if you're going to be deploying things up against guard that are like here or here, and you go second against them, you should be expecting to lose those pieces. With an army like Space Marines, where you're trying to play a slightly more elite version of the game, you can't be affording to lose those pieces early on, because I will have more pieces available than you will. Overall, though, James was a fun opponent to play against. I won the game 92-44, and he actually did pretty well at the event overall. He ended up going 3-2. But from my end, I felt fairly relieved that I was able to get off this first one, because I was a little bit worried that this mission can be a little bit dicey if your opponent is aggressive and knows how to stage and take reasonable risks effectively, and then they end up going first as well. But it's a nice warm-up to the event, got used to the venue a little bit, and we were feeling good about our list, and we were getting ready for game 2. For my second game of the day, I ended up playing up against Andrew and his Drukhari and Cabalite Cartel. And if you've never played up against Cabalite Cartel before, it's kind of a weird detachment. You can kind of think of it as Drukhari, but Tyranids invasion fleet, where at the beginning of the game, you pick a thing in the opponent's army. If it's infantry, you get army-wide sustained against, maybe it's every target, but you get army-wide sustained against certain things. If you pick a vehicle, you get army-wide lethals against certain targets. And then if you pick a character or something, you can get like precision against them. But the difference between this and invasion fleet is if you kill like the unit that you selected in order to give yourself the buffs for 1 CP, and if your warlord is still alive, you can be like, okay, and now we're picking that thing, and it can change what your buffs are. I'm not gonna lie, this is not a knock on Andrew. I don't think this detachment is real. But let's go ahead and take a look at the list. He was running an Archon with an enhancement, another Archon with a different enhancement. One of them was like free Ingress and Deepstrike. I don't remember what the other one was, to be honest. He had Drazar, Lady Malice, who has a Vect Aura, 2 units of 10 Cabalite Warriors that were each split into 5s with Venoms, 4 Venoms, 2 Chronos. These have like Flamers and an annoying Feel No Pain, I think, and they also have an aura of whenever you use a pain token near them on a 4-up, you get it back. He had 1 Hand of the Archon, he had 1 unit of Incubi, 1 unit of 10 Mandrakes, 1 unit of 5 Mandrakes, 2 Ravagers, but they didn't have the Dark Lances. They had Disintegrator Cannons, which are like, they're kind of like bad plasma guns, to be honest. He had a unit of 3 Reavers, and then 2 units of Scourges with Dark Lances. And these are, of course, the ones that move, shoot, move. Andrew and I played this one on Mission A, which is Take and Hold Tipping Point, and once again, we were on Games Workshop Layout 1. When playing this matchup, there are a couple things that I was really focused on. One, I really wanted to get Lady Malice dead because she prevents me from doing the free grenades, and she's also like not a bad blender of infantry. The second thing that I was really focused on was I really wanted to make sure that I could control the Scourges. A lot of his army is actually fairly decent at killing a lot of my infantry, but the other big problem that his army has is it's not very good at killing Rogal Thorns. If I smoke going up against the Scourges and they go to 5s re-rolling, he's going to average getting 2 hits with Dark Lances, so it's still pretty unlikely that I die to Dark Lances. But if I get unlucky and both Scourges can shoot the same Rogal Dorn, I could just lose the Dorn entirely in ways that I don't really expect to. So as long as I am creating Overwatch situations where if I can see the Scourges, I can just make sure that they can't do anything, or I can get to the Scourges and make sure they're gone as quickly as possible, I'm going to be very happy with the state of the game. This game ended up also not being a particularly close game, because my opponent had also not played up against a very aggressive guard player before. On his turn, he took Lady Malice and I think it's Cabalites, and they ended up hiding here in this pocket. And then also put like 1-2 Venoms like right behind Lady Malice in the pocket of what feels like a lot of safety. The problem with this was I had a Chimera that was here, and it started off by scouting into this pocket. Obviously not touching the terrain, so something like this. And the thing about this board is a Chimera with move, move, move can end up going from in this pocket here to right about here. And these walls, and the walls we were playing on were a little bit shorter. It didn't go all the way to here. It probably went to like about here, meaning that the Chimera now had an opportunity to see these, also dump a bunch of Kasrkin like here, and even drop a couple of Kasrkin on the other side of this wall here. Meanwhile, the rest of my army was going to be able to stage fairly effectively. A Chimera moved up to here. Dorn stayed in the same spot that we were talking about before. This Dorn moved into a relatively safe position somewhere over here. I think it was kind of hanging out like in here. But I was able to put dudes on the objective and safely put, I think it was both Krieg and a bunch of Cadians over here on this objective as well. So when I came out and killed Lady Malice and the units that they were with, and also I think I took like a Venom to like 2 or something, just by shooting like a meltagun at it, I was pretty happy because I had already accomplished my first goal. The other big thing that I thought was a pretty big surprise for my opponent was there was nothing actually standing on this objective going into bottom of 1. And of course, you cannot rapid ingress on turn 1, except in some very rare circumstances. And so it meant that the Chimera that I had, I had to move like fairly safely, like back to here actually, so that it wasn't getting shot until my opponent passed this corner. The Chimera was able to go here, and my opponent just wasn't threatening to score a 10. If he had been threatening to score this, I would have had to have taken the Krieg Engineers that were like here and just give them move, and roll in advance and see if I could get enough movement to actually get onto this objective. But the one other thing that I do want to bring up about having this Chimera going to like this kind of location here and dropping out Kasrkin is this Chimera now projects a zone of you can't come here with your Scourges of something like this, right? If he moves into any of these positions, the Flamers will just pick up 2, 3, maybe the entire unit of Scourges if I roll a little bit hot. And so it means that the unit of Scourges that were hanging out over here, they had to be pretty respectful of what I was trying to do over on this side of the board. But with our first major goal completed of getting Lady Malice off of the board entirely, and the fact that we suddenly had a ton of control over the board because we were going to score this one for sure, we were going to score this one for sure, the game became, how can I prevent my opponent from actually scoring any points? And how can I lock this one up? And the answer was to just full send the entire army on turn 2. So even though I lost like this Chimera and this Kasrkin unit and maybe like 1 or 2 other engineer units, the rest of my army just went. This Dorn came out and shot like over here and shot things that were on this objective. The Chimera that was staged here moved as far as it could this way. We had like rapid ingress unit of Scions once again into like this kind of position because our opponent did not fully screen off the objective. And then they moved to be here. The Cadians that were here like moved up this way with the Krieg in order to shoot like this way, shoot this way. And I think we dropped our other Scion unit like here to also contribute fire. And then the Dorn that had moved into this terrain piece in order to force my opponent's Ravager who was here to use the 1 CP reactive loan up, it also came out this way in order to shoot at a ton of stuff. And so in the bottom of 2, I killed 1, 2 Venoms and almost all of their contents. I killed another Venom here and most of the dudes that were inside. I killed like 3 Scourges, I think. I think I killed 1 Kronos. I think I killed the Reavers. And I more or less ended the turn with like a giant Cadian break here, a Scion break here that was threatening to Overwatch, a Dorn that was here ready to shoot down range, a Dorn that was here ready to shoot down range. And my opponent was just out of stuff. He had nothing really left in his army. He had like 1 unit of Scourgers that could maybe try and deal with my Dorns, but I also had like a Chimera full of Kasrkin here, and the only thing that my opponent had control of was his home. And after the game was over, talking to Andrew, he also did not realize how quick and how aggressive Guard could really be. He was not expecting to lose Lady Malice here. He was not expecting the rapid ingress here with the Scions in order to move up and destroy this pocket of safety once again. And these are techniques that we can use in order to get big wins against certain opponents. But the other thing that we have to remember is that against good opponents who won't let us do that, they have to give us units as well. In order to block out this rapid ingress spot here, they have to be 9 inches, meaning that they have to be in this unsafe spot, which we can, kind of block out, especially here where we had flamers that would flame anything that went there. Or they have to be like here, which is pretty close, and I was taking up a lot of that real estate where you could stand there in the first place. Or they just have to sacrifice units to go into the middle, which are going to be free pieces, which are going to be parts of the free attrition we can get against a lot of armies. And while Andrew played the game competently, he definitely did not understand how aggressive and how powerful Guard was when Guard was allowed to be the aggressing army. I ended up winning this one 100-48, and a big part of this was because I held my opponent to only 15 primary. There was a time where, I don't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but I was able to charge over this way, and by the end of the game, Nork and friends were hanging out on my opponent's home objective. For our third game of the day, we ended up playing up against Fritz and his World Eaters in Berserker Warband, which is basically the only World Eaters detachment you ever see played, where they get bonus attacks and extra strength on the charge. He was running a fairly normal looking World Eaters list overall, which had Karn, Master of Executions with a Berserker Glaive for +1 damage, 2 units of 10 Berserkers, 2 Chaos Rhinos that they go in, 2 units of Chaos Spawn, 2 units of 8-bound, 2 Forge Fiends. I don't know what this is. I wonder if he had like the wrong war gear initially added onto them. 3 Hellbrutes. One of the things about this that we end up learning over the course of the game is that he thought that having 2 fists meant that your attacks were twin-linked, but that is unfortunately not true in the Codex and was only true during the Index. I didn't mind. I very recently thought that they might have been twin-linked as well, but it definitely frazzled him when he learned that he had been playing it incorrectly. And then lastly, 2 units of Jackals as well. Fritz and I ended up playing this one on Mission O, Terraform Crucible of Battle. And as keeping with tradition, my opponent had also never played against a guard player that was as aggressive as I can be. I went with the same deployment you always do on layout 1. You put a Chimera here, so they can scout here. Put a Chimera here when your opponent doesn't have any shooting. Dorn, as always, same place. Dorn, as always, same place. 10 Krieg, ready to go out here. And then there's like Engineers, 3rd Engineers, something like that. And then like the Kasrkin on foot, and then the big Cadian brick here ready to come support this as well. My opponent, once again, thought that this was safe, and my opponent ended up putting spawn like here, 8-bound, these are some 8-bound, and I think it was 2nd unit of spawn like here, 1 Rhino, 2 Rhino, I think it was like Forge Fiend, it was like Jackals. I think both Hellbrutes started like back here, or there was a 3rd one off the board. And gamers, say it with me, the L is not safe. I ended up taking a Chimera that was here, came here to be on the objective, dropped Kasrkin, and we killed some 8-bound. And took our opponent off of this objective, so they only scored a 4. Almost the entirety of the way that this game is played between Guard and World Eaters is centered around the fact that they have a Rhino full of Berserkers right here. And then they would love to have 2nd Rhino right here. So Fritz made a couple of small mistakes. Fritz made a couple of small deployment errors, I think. The first one is that his 2nd Rhino ended up coming here. This might not have been where it was deployed, but it's where it ended up after his first turn. And this Rhino needs to start here, where it doesn't have to pivot in order to get through here. So you can have 1 Rhino here, 2nd Rhino goes here. Or it can also start here. And the 2nd Rhino needs to come to this location. And then from here, you're moving 11 inches out of the Rhino, plus access to advance and charge, gets you like a maximum threat range of something absolutely ludicrous like this. And the Rhino from this spot has a similar absolutely ludicrous threat range, something like this. It is so far. You can take up so much space so quickly if you roll good on your advance and on your charge. And so Fritz had like this one that had like a ton of like range on its threat. But this one here, this threat goes to about here, right? Like, yeah, you can probably get all of this. It's maybe a little bit farther than that. But realistically, anything beyond this, it's not really that threatening against. And so I was able to disrespect, I think this one was Karn, and I think this one was Mo. But so much of this game came down to the fact that my Chimera with Kasrkin ended up living way too much. I actually ended up holding this objective because the Forge Fiend didn't kill the Chimera, and the Spawn didn't kill the Kasrkin. So I ended up just having like OC on this objective, and I ended up scoring a 12 by holding this, and this on turn 2. That's not supposed to happen. I got lucky on dice. But the other major problem that my opponent ended up having was that I would put a line of dudes here, and he would have to give me a unit because he didn't want to, charge the Berserkers into it. And then I'd be like, okay, we're going to do it again. Would you like to charge your Berserkers into it? And he's like, no. And so the Berserkers didn't really play the game until turns 4 and 5, which at that point they're still very, very difficult to deal with. But I still had like a Dorn, and most of the Cadian brick kind of hanging out here. But one of the other really big things that was funny about this game was I was doing everything I could to kind of delay this unit going out and making sure that if it did end up getting a good charge, it was going to charge into something where I was going to unload a Dorn into it immediately afterwards, because there's a couple important breakpoints to know about this. One, we talked about it in a video I did a couple days ago. 10 Scions or 5 Scions with a command squad are going to kill 7 to 9 Marines that are not on objective without popping a strat, and the Marines are in cover. 2, if these Marines are in the open or on an objective, you're killing 9 to 10 fairly consistently. If they are either on an objective or not in cover. 3, if you pop a strat, you are very consistently killing 10 plus the character if they are on an objective. Regardless, this is almost all of the Berserkers, and you can realistically control what they surge into immediately afterwards, and you can potentially charge them and tank shock them, you can charge them with Nork, you can throw melt mines into them. There's lots of ways to get your last couple of Marines gone. The other major thing to know is that a Rogal Dorn shooting at them while in Melta 2, because by the time the Berserkers charge you, you are going to be within Melta 2. If you just shoot at them in cover, you're generally going to be killing 6 to 8 Marines. If you pop Ignores cover, you very quickly bring this number to 8 to 10 Marines. And then they can be wherever, it doesn't really matter. And if you decide to pop lethals as well, which is really nice for the stubbers, you very quickly go to almost always killing 10 Marines. So as long as I have one of these tools available, I'm going to punish the Berserkers when they come out. So I want them to come out, but I want them to come out in such a way that they aren't tagging my Dorns because of it. And so one of the ways that I tried to end up stopping these Marines from going where they wanted to was, I don't remember what they shot at, but I dropped a unit of Scions. But I had a unit of Scions come in over here, and I just declared this 9 into the Rhino, because he was intentionally leaving enough space here in order to get the Berserkers out on this side. So that meant that there was space for my Scions to land. And I actually hit it. And because I hit like exactly a 9, I was able to take these and move them around, and a bunch of them were pile consolidating in over this way. So I actually took his home from him in the bottom of 2 going into his turn 3. And so from this position, Fritz had scored a 4 plus 2 on Terraform on turn 2. And then just a 0 plus 2 on Terraform on turn 3. Whereas I had scored a 12 plus 3 on Terraform on turn 2. And then I end up getting an 8 plus 4 on Terraform on turn 3. So my opponent had scored a total of 8 primary from this position, meaning that I had a 12, 13, 14, 15, a 19 point. I was up 19 points of primary going into my opponent's turn 4. This is enough of a lead that I was very confident I was going to win, kind of no matter what, but I was also running out of assets. And I think it was on turn 4 or maybe turn 5, the Karn Brick finally comes out here, and they roll an advance and charge, or like they move into here and then charge like a Dorn that I had moved up fairly aggressively in order to try and stop him from holding this objective. Oh, this is actually really funny. So what I had done is I had dropped a unit of Scions here, and I had like a Dorn, something like this. And my opponent had a Hellbrute that was on full HP and a Forge Fiend that was fairly low. And I had drawn Tempting Target, and of course my opponent marks this as Tempting Target. And what I had wanted to do was I wanted to kill this in shooting and then charge the Hellbrute such that I can kill it with a tank shock. And so what I had done is I had dropped these Scions because they didn't really have a job. They couldn't come back anywhere over here in a way that was useful. There might have been a spot to drop back here and try and pop this Rhino so that these guys were stuck, but But I was trying to get this Hellbrute, so what I ended up doing is I took these Scions and I shot them at the Hellbrute with the goal of trying to get it low. Because I had reroll wounds, I could make a really educated decision about how many saves I was making my opponent take. And so I'm pretty sure I intentionally re-rolled some successful wounds in order to be like, I do not want this Hellbrute to die. And then I got the Hellbrute low. I got the Hellbrute down to, I think it was like 2 wounds. I was like, okay, cool. We're going to take this Dorn, and we're going to shoot the Forge Fiend now, because we can just straight up kill that one, and it's going to be fine. I'm going to tank shock this Hellbrute to death. It's not going to be able to do its reactify it, and this Dorn will get my tempting target. And then the Forge Fiend explodes, and the Hellbrute dies. And I remember laughing at that one. I remember giving Fritz a high five, because he was like, okay, well now I'm going to sticky this on death, and you're not going to get the tempting target. And I was just like, that is correct. This is a 10-point swing because you rolled a 6 for your deadly demise. But it was really funny. I had a good time. I was already so far ahead in the game at this point that it was just a funny thing that happened. So backing up, once again, if you're trying to play the world leaders in this matchup, a couple of things that you need to do. One, you need to have the Rhino. It can start here. It can start here. Either way, it needs to end in this pocket in the end of turn 1. Even if you're going second, you want the Rhino in the pocket, because let's say I put like a unit of like Chimera here and drop Kasrkin out, somewhere in this kind of spot. I don't want to shoot the Berserkers anymore, so depending on how you do it, you can actually end up getting guys like out, reacting to the way that the Chimera has moved, threatening to surge into the Kasrkin, because Kasrkin are not going to kill that many Marines in cover. They're probably going to kill like 4. They can kill 5 Scout Marines pretty consistently, but 5 3-up safe Marines is like, you're going to get close. You're going to need to throw a grenade. You're going to need to get that Melt-a-Mine, and then you're probably going to kill like 4 of them afterwards. So you're going to be looking at like maybe 6 Marines. But the other thing you need to do is the Chimera that had deployed here, that was hiding behind so that it didn't get Forge Fiended from this direction. You need to put spawn here, because they scout, I think it's like scout 9, and then like move 10 and advance and charge. You need these spawn to come tag this Chimera, because this Chimera is the major threat to go over here and attack things in this pocket. And because these spawn, and because the spawn that started here ended up being the ones that were on this objective terraforming, these 8-bound that he put up here were not safe, because the Chimera very easily comes here and shoots the 8-bound to death. So by not being aggressive, he ended up giving the tempo back to me. He ended up passing it back, and I was like, well, I'm not going to be playing slow. I'm going to be forcing the issue. Worst case scenario, I score some extra primary at the end of the game. There's not going to be a lot that you can do about it. This game ended up being a lot of fun overall. I ended up winning this one 92-53 because I was absolutely dominant on primary throughout the course of this game. So at the end of the day, I had gone 3-0 on the first day of the event. I was feeling pretty good. I wanted to keep winning, not only because I wanted to keep winning, but also because there were several Necron players in the X and 1 bracket, meaning that if I end up losing a game, I was probably going to have to play against Necrons. I ended up going with my teammate Ken to a really good like fried chicken place. It had a really nice like honey fried chicken. And the next morning, we realized that we were going to be playing each other in round 4, which was pretty funny because we had just driven from Western Washington to Eastern Washington in the same car. Turns out when both you keep winning, you end up playing each other. Now, for people who have been watching the channel for a while, this is the same Ken that I ended up interviewing after the Tacoma Open, after he took Canis Rex in his guard army and went 7-1. This time, he was going back to his previous army that he had been playing quite a bit, Adeptus Sororitas Bringers of Flame. And Ken was running Morven Vol, 1, 2, 3 Immolators, all with multi-meltas, 1 Rhino, 1 unit 3 Arcoflagellants, 3 Castigators, 2 units of Dominions running around with some Meltaguns, Paragon Warsuits to run around with Morven Vol, 2 units of Retributors, 1 unit of Seraphim, and then 1 unit of Novitiates. Now, Bringers of Flame, of course, is a fairly aggressive detachment. It has Assault on all of its weapons. You have 1 CP Advance and Disembark on your Rhino, which also lets you free reroll the Advance, and because you can reroll the Advance, it means you can plug in Miracle Dice in order to get guaranteed advances into certain places that you're trying to go. The other big thing about Bringers of Flame is it's actually a pretty decent long-range shooting army, because all the heavy bolters and all of the autocannons are 24 inches or longer, and you are getting ignores cover and +1 AP from stacking the Immolators and the Castigators all shooting at the same target. You're fairly target agnostic. You can kind of shoot whatever it is that you want to, and it's going to be fairly consistent damage, especially since you get to cheat a little bit because you're playing Sisters with Miracle Dice. The other thing that made me a little bit worried about this game was we ended up playing this one. The other thing that made me a little bit worried about playing this one was we were playing this one on Mission D, which was Tipping Point Scorched Earth. And we were playing this on GW Layout 7. There's a couple problems with playing on Layout 7. One, it's incredibly easy to barricade this wall. And my opponent has way better melee tools than I have access to, and a bunch of 25mm bases. And because we were playing on walls that were really thin, there are actually ways to put 25mm bases between the 25mm bases on my side of the wall. So 1.1ing was not as real for my opponent as it was for me. And a big reason for this is Kasrkin, which are on 28mm bases, are too big to fit between the small bases that my opponent actually had available to him. So what this means is it is way easier for my opponent to go for attacks onto my natural with better melee units that can actually go there than it is for me to launch attacks onto his natural, because he can barricade this wall in ways that are difficult for me to emulate. The other big thing is a lot of the shooting lanes on this layout are really long. You can see that the main shooting lane is right down here. There's one here that's, not as real. It doesn't come up as much. but these shooting lanes on the top and bottom of the board are pretty far. There's a lot of breakpoints in terms of how durable Sisters units are, or Sisters tanks are, that make it annoying for a Dorn to try to split fire. One, and the main one, is their toughness 10, meaning that our multi-melters are winning them on 5s. The second one is they all have a 6-up invul because it is a Sisters unit, meaning that if my opponent has any banked 6s for miracle dice, if I hand him some number of Melta saves, he just goes, nope, I am not failing that, and suddenly we get to a position where they just don't die where you might expect them to. So one Dorn is pretty likely to kill one Castigator, but if it split fires, it's very unlikely to kill two Castigators. So I felt in this game that I made one pretty big mistake, and two, I got unlucky into getting unlucky a second time, which ended up taking my one mistake and making it impossible to come back from. So let's talk about my mistake first. I ended up going first on Scorched Earth, which on this kind of board, the general flow that you can kind of expect is because it's so hard to attack your opponent's natural, it's kind of expecting to be a 10, 10, 10, and then hopefully 15, whereas your opponent is expecting to go about 10, 10, 10, 15, but this could potentially be a 20 because they can burn their own on one turn and then potentially burn the middle on the next turn. So you're generally looking at about a 5 to 10 point primary deficit when you're going first on Scorched. The other part about Scorched, though, is every time you lose primary because you're taking off of one, you are not getting those points back. It's very rare that you end up seeing someone get more than 45 points on primary on Scorched Earth unless they're absolutely dominating the game. So every time I can turn one of these into a 5 instead of a 10, I'm very quickly recouping some of the primary disadvantage that I'm expecting going second on Scorched Earth. And so the way that I was planning to do this is, one, if my opponent is deploying back here, it's actually really far to like barricade this on the first turn. With a maximum advance of moving 12 inches, you can only put girls on this line if they start on the edge of the deployment zone and we're not in a rhino of some kind. What that meant is the first way that I could try to deny this is I put a unit of Krieg Engineers, they scout to here. What that meant is the first way they can deny it is I have a unit of Krieg Engineers, they scout 6 inches up to wherever that is, and then they can move, and or advance and put enough OC on this objective in order to take it away from my opponent. So our first 10 is fairly locked in, and we're likely to be putting our opponent on a 5. The biggest mistake that I made this game was my opponent had nothing in reserves, and typically I have a unit of Cadians that are kind of just like hanging out over here, screening out the backfield. These Cadians moved to this spot, and this might not seem like an error to a lot of people. It didn't seem like an error to me at the time. However, the reason why this is a major error is because this is where I wanted to rapid ingress Scions. Remember a couple of things. One, if you are trying to barricade this with small bases, these walls are really thin, so you could actually put 25mm bases in like the tessellating circles in here in order to actually charge through the wall. And Scions are all on 25mm bases, and they have 2 attacks and wound rerolls. They're not going to kill a ton of Sisters, but they're going to kill enough Sisters that they probably don't die on the swing back against most of the small units my opponent had. So it's very difficult for my opponent to actually block out Scions who start here, move their way, and can actually, if they're not blocked out, get a line of dudes on the other side of the wall here to not only shoot, but then charge whatever is beyond. The reason you can't do this with Cadians is because Cadians, like that, yeah, they can threaten to move their way and shoot, but their guns aren't very good, and their melee is even worse. So I don't have that follow-up opportunity with the Scions. So that was the major mistake that I made. The spot that I felt like I got pretty unlucky on was I had a Dorn that started here, and Ken brought out a Castigator to poke out beyond here so they could shoot pretty far down this line. And I had like engineers or something here, and the engineers came out in order to throw a bomb, and there were like some girls here, and then I like flamered most of these girls to death. But the other thing, in order to get this Dorn within 18 inches of the Castigator, which was something like this Dorn needed to move in order to get the line. So I go ahead and get into the start of the shooting phase, and the first thing I do is I throw the remote mine at this. For people who are watching WTC FAQ, it is worth noting that the start of phase in a lot of GW events is not treated as the singular event that you oftentimes see for a lot of WTC events, where the timing is a little bit different, especially at the starts and end of phases. Anyway, I threw the bomb here, and the bomb ended up doing 5 damage to the Castigator, meaning that the Castigator was down to 6. With that information, I decided this Dorn here, I'm not going to spend CP to snap to it. It is going to be hitting on Ballistic Skill 4, and all this Dorn needs to do is it needs to do 3 damage. It needs to do 1 Oppressor, 1 Pulverizer, or 1 Melt-a-Shot, or even 1 Autocannon shot to go through this Castigator, and then I can grenade it and kill it. And then from there, my objective is pretty much entirely safe for the rest of the game. So with my Dorn here, and the Castigator hanging out here, I open fire with the Dorn at the Castigator, he pops smoke, and my Dorn does 0 damage. My opponent passed like the 1 melt-a-save. I think he like slammed a 6 on a miracle dice, I think. The Oppressor, he just saved everything naturally. The Pulverizer just didn't do any wounds, and I got nothing through the Stubber. And then I was like, okay, well that's bad. Let's go ahead and throw a grenade at the Castigator. The grenade does 4 damage, leaving the Castigator at 2 wounds. And then I ended up charging it, and the Krieg Engineers did 1 wound, leaving this Castigator on 1. Now, was I a little bit greedy, not spending a CP to snap to it? A little bit. But I present to you gamers that the Rogal Dorn, even while hitting on 5s, is still 22% likely to kill, is still supposed to do an average of 6, and is supposed to do at least 3 damage 86% of the time. And then that puts me in grenade range. Now, of course, the math is going to be a little bit worse than that because miracle dice do exist. But 86% of the time, I'm supposed to get at least the 3 damage that I need in order to get a very likely grenade to kill it. Still, a little bit unlucky. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is knowing what I knew afterwards, doing at least 1 damage was 91% of the time. So only 9% of the time do I realistically not actually kill this Castigator, which feels pretty bad knowing that math now. I didn't know the math at the time. I was expecting it was like 75%. I would do the 3 that I needed to. It was higher than that. Now, the next part of this that made it even more unlucky that I think ended up sealing the game away was this Castigator on 1 wound in combat turns around and does 6 to the Dorn right back. Ken spends the rest of his turn shooting this Dorn. He brings out an Immolator that's here, strips cover. He brings out another Castigator that's within 24, comes over here. This one, from all the way down range, not within 24, comes through. And between his entire army that was able to shoot the Dorn, my Dorn dies exactly. Partly because the Castigator that I left on 1 did 6 damage to the Dorn. Now, I don't know what exactly the odds are. Of course, it gets a little bit wonky if you have some good miracle dice. You can just plug in 6s for hunter killers that end up going through the save. But I'm pretty confident that up until the spot where I lost this Dorn, I was pretty happy with the game state overall. And that shut down my ability to play the rest of the game. Because if this Dorn was alive, it gets to shoot back. It probably picks up the Immolator that's right here. It maybe does a little bit of damage to one of the Castigators. But the other Dorn that was kind of waiting here can also feel confident to come out this way, probably kill this Castigator. And maybe if all of the other shooting goes well, maybe we do a little bit of damage to this Castigator as well. The funniest thing is this Castigator that was left on 1 ended up being alive until the end of the game. It ended up hanging out over here, just kind of in combat with Krieg for like 2 turns because they also just could not get the last wound through. But yeah, because the Dorn ended up being dead, because the Castigator lived on 1, and then that meant that I could never aggress in the game again. I tried to take a charge with Nork and friends that were, something like this. They charged into this Castigator, kind of swung around. There was actually a really funny moment where Nork goes in, headbutts the Castigator to death in my opponent's turn, piles into Morven Vol and friends, and dev wounds 1.5 suits to death. So Nork ended up actually doing quite a bit back for me. But I was never able to take this away from my opponent again. My opponent burned my home at the end of the game. And even though I ended up getting 40 on my primary, I wasn't able to burn this because I was just in combat. I just held it. So what ended up happening was it ended up going 10, 10. I ended up getting 10s every turn. I didn't get my 15 because I just ran out of stuff. Whereas my opponent went 5, 10. This is the thing where not having the Scions coming in is one of the big deals. This probably should have been another 5, but ended up being a 10. And then 10, and then he ended up burning my home at the end for a 20. So this ended up being a 45 to 40. So the primary ended up not being that bad overall, but I was not able to score a single card on turns 4 or 5 because because I just lost too many assets. The Scions that wanted to ingress here ended up dropping here and doing no damage to this Castigator. The Cadians that were over here had tried to swing charge off this Castigator in order to put OC on this objective, but they ended up getting heroic because I rolled too high on the charge. And the Cadian brick that was standing just in the open, my opponent was able to just focus fire down into that and kill most of it pretty quickly. But overall, even if things had gone well for me, I'm pretty confident that the Dorn living probably earns me about 10 VP, just because it projects a lot of pressure. I can kill a lot of my opponent's stuff. I don't know exactly how it gets me all of those VP, but it's one of those things where it's like, but I remove enough of my opponent's units that they maybe can't do some secondaries. I can maybe get another 5 VP just like by burning the objective at the end of the game, because I just have the Krieg hanging out over there. And then this Scion Rapid Ingress not blocking that probably gets me another 5 VP of swing by taking this. But the problem of this whole thing is I end up losing the game by 22 points, meaning that I still needed to find 7 VP over the course of this game. And I think a lot of that is attributable to the fact that I was going first on Scorched Earth into an army that has a unit count that is very similar to mine on a map that I can't really push super effectively. And also an opponent that knew that Guard wants to play aggressively. So overall, I think Ken played the game really well. I think I made one pretty big mistake, and then I think I got unlucky once, and it compounded into getting unlucky a second time. And I think between those 3 things, that's probably the biggest difference that I needed to find in this game. So even though I lost, I still felt mostly happy about the way that I played. I don't think I was supposed to snap to it over here, but it is one of those things where maybe in a team's environment, I go ahead and do it just to make sure I don't get unlucky, because this ended up being a 6-14, whereas if it was just dead, I'm probably looking at a 9, because I ended up losing this one 65-87. Ken did go on to win the event. He did win his 5th round, so he ended up getting first overall, and from this position, I was also looking at a situation where I had some really strong tiebreakers going into the 5th round, so as long as I won, I was going to have the best opponent game win percentage, and I should be an easy shoo-in for second. And if Ken were to lose the 5th round and I won the 5th round, I would probably actually win, because my tiebreakers were so good that I could win the event going 4-1. But for our last game of the event, I ended up playing up against Joel and his Cursed Legion Necrons. And Cursed Legion is interesting because it's basically +2 strength across the entire army, but the major stratagem that this one has, it's like Wrath of the Rock, where at the end of your opponent's charge phase, for 2 CP, you can charge something that's within 6 inches of you. And that's the main stratagem. It also has Advance in Charge, which is pretty good, but Joel is playing the Nightbringer, a Locust Lord with Mask of the Necrosaur. I don't remember what this one does. Necrosaur Inventar with all the cool stuff that brings. 1 Technomancer with no enhancement, 1 Technomancer with Murder Mind. This gives you +3 inch movement and the ability to attach to Destroyer units. 1 unit of 3 Canoptic Scarab Swarms, 1 unit of 6 Wraiths, 2 Crypto Thralls, 1 Doomsday Arc, 1 unit of 5 Flayed Ones, 6 Locust Destroyers with the Gauss Cannon. These are I think it's 3 attacks at like 5/2/2 base, and then they reroll hits against things on objectives. 2 Locust Heavy Destroyers with the 1-shot 6 damage gun, and then 2 units of 3 Ophidian Destroyers, and then 1 unit of 6 Scorpic Destroyers that were being led by the Technomancer with the plus movement. And this is a pretty neat little combination, because the Murder Mind gives you +3 moves, so the Technomancer already moves 10 inches fly, and then the Scorpic Destroyers, I think they move like 8 inches or something like that. So realistically, like, the unit moves about 11 after you factor in coherency towards the end, but you also have access to Advance in Charge. So when you are moving 13 inches for your fastest guy, plus Advance in Charge, that gives you 13, 19 of maximum threat range of 31 inches, which is really, really far. Joel and I ended up playing this one on Mission E, which is Take and Hold, Hammer and Anvil, and yes, that is 3 games of Take and Hold over the course of this event. Now, this being on Layout 7 Hammer and Anvil is a little bit worrying for me. So the first thing about this is my opponent, if he puts a unit of dudes here 1 inch back from the wall, it is not possible for me to stand on this objective without allowing my opponent to 2 CP charge me. This is an incredibly powerful attrition tool for an army that already is fairly reliant on attrition because it is Necrons. So the basic loop that he can do here is, as long as he has the 2 CP available, he comes out, charges my dudes, and then walks behind the wall and gets ready to do it again. The other thing is also kind of true. So if my opponent were to put, like, destroyers or something here, and I'm standing right here on the objective, my opponent can, if he wants to, if I don't come out and kill him, can declare long charges, or if he has something that can fly that can go over the far side of my dudes, he won't be able to use little bases to be here, but it is the kind of thing where I do have to be pretty careful about even standing on my own objective. Joel and I played this game for one actual battle round. Joel ended up going first, and he decided, I am going to play this aggressively, but he didn't commit to the whole thing. So he had a unit of Wraiths start over here, and a unit of Flayed Ones were like here, Catan, and then the Scorpic Destroyers were something like this, and he had like a DDA, and those are like the real pieces of his army that I care about. He also had the, this is the Scorpex, and this is the, I don't know what they're actually called, Locust, the Gauss. These are the Gauss Destroyers, the ones that shoot pretty good. And the thing that I think Joel made a mistake on this game was he rolled this advance first. He rolled the Wraiths first. Because when he rolled like a 4 or a 5 or something. And then the Wraiths ended up trying to tuck into here as safely as they could. And it was pretty safe. It was in a spot where I couldn't really draw line of sight. But then, after he rolled this advance here with the Wraiths, he ended up rolling the advance on the Scorpic Destroyers. And I had scattered up a Chimera to be like here. And when he rolled the advance on the Scorpics, he rolled a 5. Meaning that the fastest model in this unit is going 13 plus 5 with his advance and charge. And realistically, after coherency, this is probably like 16. Like 16 plus advance and charge. And the distance between Scorpex being here and my Chimera, which is scouted up to the edge of this, is a total of 19 inches. So when, we'll call it 16 inches for coherency purposes. When you move 16 inches, this is about a 3-inch charge, which is interesting. So Joel ended up putting the Shard of the Nightbringer like here on the back edge of this objective, and the Scorpex came out over here and mollywopped a Chimera. And then I took the Kasrkin out and I dropped them out like this, such that he could only touch the Kasrkin. So at the end of his turn, Joel had the Scorpic unit here. He had the Nightbringer here. He had a unit of Wraiths here, and he had like a line of Flayed Ones here. And then he had his Shooty Destroyers and his Doomsday Arc somewhere in here. At the same time, I had deployed a Dorn like here. The other Dorn was like here. The big Cadian brick was about here. Then I had like Kasrkin and like the other Kasrkin and a Chimera. They were all smushed in this spot. And I knew we were about to play a game of dice. I had measured out that if this Dorn stuck its barrel over the edge here, it was going to be within 18 inches of the Nightbringer. The other Dorn, by sticking his barrel out here, could also be within 18 inches of the Nightbringer. And then the Cadian brick could move kind of like this way. And I knew if I killed the Nightbringer and this entire Scorpic unit, or even most of the Scorpic unit, I won the game. So I went ahead and leaned into it. I felt pretty confident that I could kill all of this, but whether or not I would was going to be a question of what the dice were feeling like. So I go ahead, I take my Dorn, poke barrel here, other Dorn, poke barrel here. I desperate escape the Kasrkin so that they are, doing their best to 1.1 this wall over here. Cadian brick comes out here. The Krieg brick lines up. The Engineers line up all over here for the Scorpex. Kasrkin that are behind the wall come to here. I put a unit of Krieg Engineers, 1.1 on the far side of the wall. The Chimera comes out, touches the objective, put more Kasrkin here. Another unit of Engineers comes out here, and I just said to my opponents, and we are battling. This is the battle. We are just going to shoot each other and see what happens at the end of it. So I go ahead. I go and shoot this Dorn first at the Nightbringer. It's touching the objective here. It's touching the objective. So I go ahead and pop the lethal strat, and I do 10 damage to the Nightbringer. Now, on average, I know you're supposed to do 8 or 9. So I was on the high end of doing damage to the Nightbringer. And then I took all of this. I threw my free grenade, I did all of my shooting, the Kasrkin shot as well, and I do an additional 5 damage to the Nightbringer, leaving it on 1 wound remaining. And this is where I go, oh no, how greedy am I allowed to be? So what I decided to do is I took this Dorn and I split fired. I put the Meltas over here, and I put the Stubbers over here, and I put everything that was damage 3. So the Oppressor, the Pulverizer, and the Autocannon all went over here. And this went incredibly well. The Nightbringer, I don't remember what he died to. I think I did like 15 damage in Meltas immediately afterwards. So this Dorn almost one-shot the Nightbringer by himself. Remember, this is 6 Scorpic Destroyers, which each have 3 wounds and a 5-up Feel No Pain from the Technomancer. And then it is 2 Crypto Thralls, which I think have 3 wounds and a 5-up Feel No Pain. They might have an Invul as well. I killed both cryptos, and I think it was three of the Scorpex as well with just the Dorn shooting. Then I take the Cadian brick, which is here, shoot them at the Scorpex. This unit has 13 shots of plasma that hit on 4s, and 1 shot of plasma that hits on 3s from the Castellan pistol. I hand my opponent 13 plasma saves because I rolled like 5 sustains, and the unit died exactly. So going back to the goals, I needed to kill the Nightbringer, I needed to kill all of this. Basically, nothing else really mattered. And I knew that my opponent had one opportunity to try and kill everything back. So on his turn, Joel took the destroyers. The destroyers came out like, something like this in order to line up a bunch of shots. DDA took this spot here in order to shoot down range. He brought out both of the damage 6 destroyers down here to shoot into the butt of the Dorn. But partly because his army is fairly elite, also because he needed to go forward, he took the Wraith Brick, and they came out something like this, and he had Defense Stronghold. So I ended up Rapid Ingressing Scions over here, because there's just nothing that could screen on this side, and they were going to take the Ophidians off of his home. But he goes in, he shoots the DDA, I pop smoke on my Dorn. DDA gets 4 shots, misses every single one. Then the Destroyers come out, and the Destroyers, then these guys down here go ahead and shoot at the same Dorn. One of them gets a shot through, does 6 damage, Dorn's down to 12. Then he's like, what should I do with these Gauss destroyers? What should they shoot at? And at this point, I remind him, don't forget, I've already smoked the Dorn that you get rerolls against, and I have access to Armor of Contempt. And he goes, that's a really good point. I'm going to shoot this at the Cadian brick instead. He kills like 19 of them because I pop Armor of Contempt on the dudes just so that I get basically my base save because I'm in cover, Armor of Contempt, which basically just reverts back to the normal saves. And at that point, Joel goes, I think we both know this game is done. And I go, yeah, I think so. Because this probably dies. I don't know how many of the Wraiths I kill, but but realistically, with like Necrosaur hanging out like here, the things I really want to kill is I want to kill the Destroyers, and I want to kill Necrosaur here. And then he's going to be running around with and then I'll kill the 3 Ophidians that are on his home over here. So I'm going to hold him to a 5 because he's probably going to hold this one. But his Necrosaur will be gone. Most of these destroyers, maybe all the destroyers will be gone. And then he's playing the rest of the game with Wraiths. And I still have another Scion brick that is just in reserve, ready to play the game. And so Joel said, yep, I don't think I can win this game. Let's go ahead and talk it out from here. So we went through, we looked at the rest of the cards, we looked at the rest of the primary and everything like that, and just drawing, I ended up winning this one 91-39. Like I said, I think Joel made one mistake, partly because the game didn't go very long, and it was doing this advance last. Because if he's going to play this aggressive play here, the Nightbringer, which was here, it's sitting on the back edge of this objective, maybe could have stood on the forward edge of the objective. And then the Wraiths that were over here and advanced over here first, maybe they could have stood here where they were going to be more able to do things on the next turn. But because he played really aggressively on one side of the board and relatively defensively on the other side of the board, it meant that my opponent turns out exactly what I could kill in front of me. And then when he had one opportunity for the DDA to go absolutely sicko mode and just ace a Dorn like it can do, it shouldn't do, but it can do, it did not. It didn't do a single point of damage to the Dorn at all. So by playing one half of the board aggressively and one half of the board defensively, I was able to kill the entire aggressive half of the army, and then unfortunately took basically no damage on the clapback, because I think I lost 10 Krieg Engineers, 10 Kasrkin, or 15 Kasrkin, and a Chimera, which meant that I had all of my damage still intact. And so the game ended. So like I said, Ken ended up winning his last game, going 5-0, winning the whole thing. I ended up getting second at the event because I had a fantastic opponent game win percent at 72%. The next highest was 60%, which was Fritz. And my opponent that had the worst record at the event was James, and he still got 8th, going 3-2. So overall, going 4-1 and only losing to my teammate, who I have not yet beaten in a game, meant that I ended up getting some pretty generous prizing overall from Bailey. And as such, I am the proud new owner of the new Corsair Combat Patrol. Yay! Elves, yay! Which is always very exciting. With that, though, I was pretty happy with how I played this event overall. I do think, like I said, I made one major mistake, which I think potentially prevented me from winning the event overall. And otherwise, I don't think I made any big mistakes in any of my other games, which meant that I did win all of them. Just play more aggressively, and you're going to have a lot of success as guard. With that, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of an After Action Report of the PNW Warlord Spring GT. I've been your host, Joshua Howard, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.